continue to move beyond sort of the stereotype of our office as a placement center. The placement center model suggests that decisions are made for students, and we recognize that you're making decisions yourself, and that that's really the objective. And for us as a center, for us as a university, we want to put systems in place, put support in place that continue to acknowledge and emphasize that as it relates to your education, as it relates to your careers, that you are at the center. There's a couple of changes that we've observed and that continue, and many of you as students are sort of initiating some of these changes. One is the emphasis on experiential learning. We're going to hear more about this. And it's amazing, actually, the number of first-year students, for example, who are coming to the university and already have internship experience. And so students are coming articulate and knowledgeable about the value of this experience, and that's only going to continue. A second piece is entrepreneurship and the increased emphasis of not only finding a career, but creating a career. And so that's really exciting. We had our career fair yesterday, and this is something I've never seen before, and I've been in career services for 20 plus years. We had a student at a table, and he's a student entrepreneur, has an app that he's developed, and he was recruiting for a developer. And at one point, I was talking with him, and he said, I need to leave by 2 o'clock so I can make it to class. So here he is, as a student entrepreneur, is also recruiting other students to contribute to his venture. And so that suggests things are different, and you have the opportunity to not only find, but to create. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that we're increasingly hearing from hiring organizations that they're interested in all majors. And that suggests opportunities for everybody. It also suggests that intellectually, you can pursue what is of interest to you, and that practically, you can complement that with internships, with co-op, with study abroad, with community service, etc. And many of you already recognize that, and you're doing that. So I, again, want to welcome you. We're really thrilled that you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to Drew Poppleton. Drew is our Assistant Director for Experiential Learning. Drew led the effort yesterday with our career fair and our programming with this today and other programs that we've hosted. So again, welcome, and I'll turn it over to Drew.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled to introduce to you today the award-winning journalist and authority on higher education, Mr. Jeff Selingo. I came to know about Jeff's work initially through LinkedIn, actually. He shares thought leader status with a select group of individuals, including Barack Obama and Richard Branson. So not too shabby company.
Quite a motley crew.
A motley crew, if you ask me. And you know, a lot of the LinkedIn discussion groups I'm a part of were awash in Selingo Insight. And they were all trading links to Jeff's blog at the Chronicle of Higher Education and to published articles of his at the New York Times and the Washington Post. And it seemed that everywhere I encountered Jeff, he was tackling the tough subjects in higher education. And he was doing it with a strong voice and a reasoned perspective. I may have encountered Jeff's work only recently, but he's been immersed in higher education reporting and editing for the past 15 years. From 2007 to 2011, he served as the editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education, where he now holds the position of editor-in-chief. He's also a senior analyst, or senior fellow, excuse me, at Education Sector, which is an independent think tank in Washington, D.C. Jeff has appeared, or has been a featured speaker before dozens of national higher education groups and appears regularly on regional and national radio and television programs such as NPR, PBS, MSNBC, CBC, CBS. He received a bachelor's degree in journalism from Ithaca College and a master's degree in government from the Johns Hopkins University. He has a book coming out in May titled College Unbound, the future of higher education and what it means for students. And so given his busy schedule, we are thankful that he can be with us today to talk about majors of the future. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Selingo to Case Western.
Thanks, Drew, for that kind introduction. First of all, thank you for ordering up this great weather in Cleveland. As Drew mentioned, I went to Ithaca College undergrad, so I'm kind of used to snow in October and snow in May. Although I notice all the pictures of Case Western around campus are all on beautiful sunny days. I'm sure the view books look like that too. And then you're here in February and you're thinking, what did I get myself into? Usually I only accept speaking engagements in Florida at this time of year. But as Drew mentioned, I'm actually editor at large now of the Chronicle. And I stepped down from editor back in 2011 because it was soon before that I stepped down that I attended a day-long session at Harvard Business School with Clay Christensen, who's kind of the leader of the disruptive innovation movement in the United States, and who has looked at this idea of disruptive innovation where people kind of start down market and move up market and disrupt kind of the central core of any business, whether that's manufacturing or healthcare, whether it's publishing, whether it's the music industry. And his idea was that this idea of disruptive innovation was going to come next to higher education, and that the established players in higher education would one day, their roles would be diminished and new players would kind of take their place. And so I was, at this time, I was the editor of the Chronicle. I went up to Harvard Business School for this day-long session. There was about 50 of us in the room. And really what I heard that day fascinated me on some level and frightened me on other levels, because it certainly wasn't true of what I was reading in the Chronicle I was editing. And I thought, well, maybe I'm stuck in my office too often. So I wrote this very long memo to my boss, and I said, I've done this job for 4 years. I've been in the office mostly for 4 years, and I kind of want to step back and see what I heard up at Harvard, if it's going to be true, if this is certainly what's going to happen to the future of higher ed. And so for the next year and a half, I've spent basically on the road. I've gone to dozens of conferences on the future of higher education. There seems to be about one a week. I visited a lot of college campuses just like this. I've talked to a lot of students just like you. I've gone into high schools and talked to students there, guidance counselors, talked to faculty members, employers, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, and really have spent the last year and a half trying to figure out what is the future of higher education and how can institutions better prepare their students for the workforce of tomorrow, and how can students better manage that trip through college, that journey through college, to better prepare themselves for the future of not only the workforce, but also the future of higher education. And today I want to share those stories with you of what I've learned the last year and a half on the road. And my goal is really twofold. One is to share a vision of the future of higher education. I will say it's not the vision of the future. And secondly, to talk about how colleges and students can better prepare for that future. And what comes after college, the workforce. And at the very end, I'm not going to show any slides of this because it's totally confidential at this point, but you'll get a sneak preview for coming out in this weather. The Chronicle recently did a survey of employers about what they like and what they dislike about the college graduates they're getting. It was a national survey of college employers. We did it with Marketplace Radio of NPR, and the results will be coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm going to share a little bit of those with you today, give you a little sneak peek. And I think it's kind of interesting what we found. Some good news in there and some bad news, I think, for colleges. The confession I must start with at the beginning here, though, is that no one really knows what the future holds. I think a lot of people make predictions. As I said, I've been going to a lot of these conferences on the future of higher ed, and everybody is predicting a very different future than the present we live in now. So how many of you remember the Jetsons? Probably the students in this room don't. Oh, more than I do, okay. So you remember the Jetsons. This was, the 1960s era cartoon. And, talk of the future at these higher ed conferences I go to really reminds me of this cartoon with, flying cars and floating homes, and don't forget the robot maids. And we all know kind of what a fantasy that was. This was 1960s thinking of what life would be like now in 2013. You know, and my vision of higher ed is not this, by the way. So when I talk about the future of higher ed, I think some skeptics in the room think I'm going to predict technology is going to take over everything. And so before we go on today, I want to tell you what you're not going to hear from me today. And that's, first of all, that the residential college, the type of institution you're in right now, is not going to disappear. You're not going to hear that from me. I'm not going to say, no, will be no residential colleges in 20 years, as some people do. I'm not going to say that online education is the answer to everything. It's definitely a answer. No doubt about that, but those predictions that every single person in the US will be learning by computer in 20 years, again, I don't think are quite right. And that the liberal arts are dead, which is we've been hearing a lot of lately, that kind of the classic liberal arts degrees, whether it's in classic languages or in English or in economics or whatever, are dead. I don't quite believe that. Still, I think that higher education is really poised for some significant changes in the decade ahead. And really the chorus of change in higher ed has really increased, especially over the last year and a half. And you might wonder, why now? What is so special about this time? You know, change in higher ed has been predicted almost every decade. In the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s. You know, 1977, Newsweek ran a famous cover of two college graduates still in their cap and gown at a construction site. And they said, you know, the end of college. Predicted back in 1977. And we all know that actually college enrollments have boomed since then. And again, in the 1990s, early 1990s, when I went to college, there was a dip in the student market at that time. And again, predictions, thousands of colleges are going to go out of business by the end of the decade. And we all know, actually, we have more colleges today than we had 20 years ago. So why now? You know, the economy really dipped south in 2008. September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers files for the largest bankruptcy in American history. The housing market collapses, and we all know what happened to the economy then. And yet, even after that, American colleges and universities continue to enroll more and more students. But we've seen now, in just the last year, kind of a dip. And I think there's three reasons for this. One is the housing market. The finally now has been this kind of lagging thing, has now finally caught up to higher education, in that families no longer can use their house as an ATM. It was, I think, true in the last decade that parents, especially families and parents that had equity in their homes, could use that equity to pay for increasingly rising costs at colleges and universities. No longer possible. Really a cash crunch right now among families, and that's why you're increasingly seeing people ask more about the value of higher education. Secondly, states are getting out of the business of higher education. 29 states gave less to higher education this year than they did 3 years ago. And then finally, the federal government. You all know what's happening in Washington. It seems every couple of months we're going off the fiscal cliff. There is really a cash crunch there as well in Washington. You add all three of those things together, and I think it portends a future, and actually a future in some places that is here now, where students and parents are going to be paying more out of pocket for their education. You know, the median net worth right now of American families hasn't been this low since 1992. So tuition is eating up a larger share of parents' income. And this graph, and you may not be able to see it well in the back, but basically in 2001, less than 25% of median income went to pay for average tuition. Today, it's closing in on 40%. So there's been a big difference just in this decade of this rising share of family income that's going to pay for college tuition. I've been thinking a lot of this lately. I have a 3-year-old at home and a 1-year-old. And so we set up a 529 plan for them. And I've been thinking, my God, how much do I have to save for college when that 3-year-old goes to college in 15 years now? And so I recently took today's average tuition, just tuition, not fees, not housing, at a public, and then took it average at a private college. And I gave an inflation rate maybe of 4% just to figure out how much it would be. And, it turned out to be $74,000 for 4 years of a public college and $214,000 for 4 years of a private college. And by the way, just tuition. So I haven't added fees. Somewhere my girls are going to have to live, and they're going to have to feed themselves, so we'll add more onto that. And this is a fairly conservative 4% increase year over year until the time they go. And so this is, I think, why there is this rising chorus of people asking, what am I going to do with this degree I'm getting? Because obviously many of you probably in this room and people you know are going much further into debt to pay for this, and I bet you my daughters are going to have to do that as well. And so I think that this is why more and more people are asking about the value of the college degree. At the same time, we no longer have a common definition of what higher education means in this country. So, 1940s, we had the GI Bill for the returning GIs from World War II. 1950s, we had kind of this race to space, kind of the Sputnik era. The 60s had this big baby boom coming to colleges. And when you said, what does higher education mean to you, most people thought a 4-year college or university. Today, there is no single one type of student, and there's no really single one type of institution. And as a result, there are other providers of education that are starting to take hold among today's students, and especially the high school students that I talk with who are thinking about college. There's everything from the Khan Academy. How many of you have heard of the Khan Academy? How many of you use it? Say many of you use it, right? So a lot of the high school students I talk to who don't understand a concept covered in class go home, they fire up the Khan Academy. They can watch one of Saul Khan's videos over and over again until they understand a concept they can't get in class. We have the Open Learning Initiative, which is at Carnegie Mellon University over in Pittsburgh. They have basically designed open courseware at 25 entry-level courses that are now being used by colleges and universities all over the country. We have Western Governors University, which was actually started in the 1990s and didn't really take hold until recently, and now they're seeing 40% growth. Why? Western Governors is based on competency, not time spent in a seat. So you get credit here for the amount of time you spend in a seat. You have probably 15-week semesters, right? Even if you know all the material, you have to stay in that seat to get credit. Maybe you don't have to show up for class, but you definitely have to, register for the class. You have to show up probably for exams, and then you get credit at the end of the semester for having been there for that time. Doesn't necessarily measure your learning in that period, and it also doesn't necessarily mean you knew all that material in 2 weeks. The thing about Western Governors is it's based on competencies. So you take a test on the way in. If you know all the information, you get credit for the course, and you move on. If you know the information after 7 weeks, you move on. Maybe it'll take you 16 weeks. The average student at Western Governors gets a bachelor's degree in 2.5 years instead of 4 years, and the average price there is $15,000. Their growth is 40%, 40% year over year in growth of students. And they're now the largest supplier of teachers in urban school districts around the country. It's right now a model that's built mostly for returning adults, but 3 traditional universities are going to copy this competency-based model this year. University of Wisconsin system is starting competency-based degrees at the Milwaukee campus. The Northern Arizona University is starting competency-based degrees, and Southern New Hampshire. And I think for all the talk of online education, this is probably one of the most powerful changes that could come to higher education in the next decade. And then, of course, we have Coursera and edX. How many of you heard of MOOCs? Okay, so massively online open courses. These are these ideas that, this is the idea that they're educating about 100,000, 150,000 students per class. edX, a combination between Harvard and MIT. Coursera, a combination of some of the most elite universities in the country, including Stanford and Penn. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that colleges today, traditional colleges like Case Western, are competing in a much more crowded marketplace than 10 or 15 years ago, because we no longer have the traditional student nor the traditional provider. And as a result of this, they're having a more difficult time proving value for the job that they're doing. So every year, various surveys ask college graduates if their college education was still a good investment. And as you can see, almost really corresponding to the change in the economy the last couple of years, there's a declining number of students and graduates who think that a college investment is still a good idea. Now, the fact of the matter is that we all know in this room, I think, that despite all these stories you read about don't go to college, that a college education is still well worth it on the national average, right? So, college graduates over their lifetime make more money. They earn more than non-college graduates. They're less likely to be unemployed. But the fact of the matter is that my belief is that colleges can no longer ride the coattails of those national averages. They really now have to start to prove their value at the local level, at the institutional level. Because students now, as they're comparing institution A, B, and C, and the tools to do this are getting much better, they want to see what the outcomes of their education are going to be at that institution, especially if they are going into debt. And my belief is that people who lead colleges are a little tone deaf to these concerns. So the last couple of years, there have been a number of surveys asking college presidents and Americans the same question. And they asked them, do you think college is worth it for the value that you get out of it? And again, not asking about cost, but asking about value. And when college presidents were asked this question, they said 76% of them said, yes, it's an excellent or good value. Only 57% of the public said it was 57% of the public said it was a fair or good value. This is what I call the value gap in American higher education, that the people who are leading today's traditional colleges and universities think what they're offering is highly valuable, and that the people who are consuming it, the parents, the families, and particularly the students, don't think it's necessarily as high of a value. Of course, this is on the national averages. And to me, until the leadership of universities kind of figures out that they need to do more things, and I could talk a little bit later about some of the things that some universities are doing now to prove their value. I think that this gap between the top and bottom is only going to increase. So the best part of my job the last year and a half has been visiting campuses just like this and going to other conferences on the future of higher ed. And one of the things I've realized is that we have this romantic vision of colleges and universities that probably needs to shift as we rethink the future of higher education. We all know the sunny quads, although you don't have it on this day here. The neo-Gothic buildings, the fall football weekends. We kind of all have this cultural vision of higher education in our minds. But the truth of the matter is that the current system is really not living up to that promise. 4 in 5 students tell researchers that they're drifting through college, that they don't really have a purpose for exactly why they're there, except to explore at this point. A third of students transfer at least once before they graduate. So they were in some ways badly matched to the institution to begin with. And this number is really surprising to me, is that 400,000 students every year drop out of college. And so we have this romantic vision that higher education is the best in the world and is working more than anything else in this country, especially K through 12 education. But yet that romantic vision I think, of higher ed doesn't necessarily align with the reality of what's happening right now. And I think that we have this vision because the delivery method of colleges and universities, the delivery method of instruction, has remained largely unchanged since the 50s and 60s. A generation when students worked alone and when professors, this is a scene from the early 1960s, when professors basically lectured in front of a large lecture hall. Well, if we go to today, that vision really hasn't changed. The lecture hall is still there. It's in color now instead of in black and white. But students are working more collaboratively. They're toggling between devices and sources of information as they learn. But that the delivery method largely, in some spots it has, but it largely has not changed, especially at larger universities. And I think that the turning point for where we're going in the future of higher education came in the summer of 2011. And that's when these two guys, and that's Sebastian Thrun on your left and Peter Norvig on your right, decided to offer their course in artificial intelligence online to the masses for free. So they both teach at Stanford. They also are both VPs at Google. Sebastian Thrun, by the way, the guy on the left, is the one who designed the self-driving car for Google. And Sebastian was at a TED conference that spring, and he saw Saul Kahn speak and talk about his concept of reaching millions of students around the world through his classroom instruction. And Thrun went to Norvik and said, hey, maybe we should put our class in artificial intelligence up online. And they thought they would get maybe 1,000 students to sign up. Well, after 1 week, they got 10,000 students to sign up. And they hadn't told the Stanford administration they were going to do this, by the way. So they said, well, maybe we better go tell the provost. And so they did. And Stanford was none too pleased, as you could imagine. And so over the next couple of weeks, they had a series of meetings, many meetings about this. And they finally came to an agreement that, well, you can still offer this course as long as you're not going to offer Stanford credit. And as long as whatever you print and give to students will not carry the Stanford name. So they agreed to that, and even though they put those stipulations on the course, thousands of more students signed up. The New York Times wrote a front page article about them in August of 2011. Soon after that, course registration went up over 100,000. And by the time the class started in October of 2011, 160,000 students from 190 countries had signed up for this course. Now, there were a lot of dropouts because it was a free course. You could kind of come in and come out, and many students didn't finish. But 22,000 students finished the course. And they got this, which was a statement of accomplishment. The Chronicle actually wrote about this statement. We called it a certificate. And within an hour, the Public Affairs Office at Stanford called us to correct it because they said it's not a certificate, it's a letter. It says "Dear and sincerely," so it is a letter. But basically what this letter said was, it was from the two professors, and it said you scored in the top 1% of the class, or whatever you scored. And it was meant as kind of a replacement for what would be a letter grade or a diploma. And the other thing they did was 200 students, by the way, perfect scores in the course. On the midterm and on the final and on other tests throughout the year, perfect scores. None of them, by the way, were Stanford students. 1,000 students scored in the top 1% of the course. And the two professors emailed those students and said, send us your resumes. So I talked to one student who did that. He had gotten his undergraduate degree at Stetson University in Florida. He was working for a defense contractor down there. And he really wanted a job at Google, and he had applied and he wasn't able to get it. And so he's thinking about going back to graduate school when he came across this course. And he said, wow, if I want a job at Google, I might as well take a course by two guys who work there. So he did. And he created a study group at his job where other students where other employees were taking the same course. And he scored near perfect on this course, and he passed on his resume to Sebastian Thrun, who passed it on to Google. A month after the course ended, he got an interview with Google, and he's now working for Google in Pittsburgh. Hundreds of students from that course got a job. Unclear, by the way, I'm not saying that every single person got the job because they took the course, but what's interesting about this person in particular is that he was about to start graduate school and decided to take this free course, bypassed the current credentialing system, and got the dream job that he wanted. Now, he still may go back to graduate school, but he was able to get that without paying one penny. After the other interesting thing about that course was that these two guys taught that course face-to-face the same semester on campus, and 300 students were enrolled in the course. By the end of the semester, only 20 students on average were showing up. Because the rest of them were taking the free online course, even though they were Stanford students, in their dorm room, in coffee shops, or whatever. The other interesting thing that Sebastian Thrun noticed is that the student grades in the course were, on the midterm and on the final, were an entire letter grade higher on average than the previous semester when he taught it face-to-face. So these were students who weren't showing up to class, who were basically taking most of the class for his free online class, and actually ended up doing better than the comparable students the semester before when he taught it face-to-face. Finally, the other thing that Sebastian Thrun has noted about this class is that to reach as many students as he did, he would have to teach 250 years on the Stanford campus. to reach that many students in that time. And so I really think that, that open resources like this Stanford course are going to become kind of the foundation of the future of higher education. And so edX, Coursera, Udacity, the Open Learning Initiative, all of these resources are going to allow professors to kind of continue the traditional idea of the classroom, but flip it. Many of you might be taking these types of courses here at Case Western, where most of the kind of lecturing is done outside of class through video technology or other open learning resources, or in other cases might provide hybrid courses. So where the classroom face-to-face instruction is actually reduced, the amount of time spent together, and where these open learning resources kind of take the place of some of those face-to-face classes. So for example, San Jose State used edX materials for their circuits course this past fall. And they learned that this past fall, only 10% of the students had to retake that course. Normally, 40% of students had to retake that course. So again, the learning outcomes drastically increased when they use these, open learning resources. Another example, Open Learning Initiative out of Carnegie Mellon. 6 universities tested this in a hybrid environment. So they took students and they put them in a face-to-face course. They took another group of students and put them in a hybrid course. And they discovered that they learned the same amount at the end of the semester, whether they were in the hybrid course or whether they're in the face-to-face course. But one big finding from this was that students in the hybrid course finished the work in 25% less time. So they were actually able to do the coursework faster. And here's where I think we have the potential to really kind of rethink a lot of the conventions of higher education. So if you can finish your work and do the same amount of work in 7.5 weeks, it gives you the opportunity to finish early. It gives you the opportunity to perhaps take more classes. If you need remedial help, so Arizona State is using this idea of adaptive technology where students learn at their own pace. And many of those students in the remedial classes, again, are finishing early and able to move on into credit-bearing courses. It also offers you flexibility, where you could do study abroad, you could do other experimental learning in the community if you had more flexibility, where you didn't have to stay in a face-to-face class for 15 weeks. So this idea that I think where technology is going to play a huge role is not in replacing the residential campus, is not necessarily in replacing face-to-face classes, but as a supplement to face-to-face classes that allows a lot more flexibility for the future and allows students to get different skills. And we could really rethink how we organize the college experience, how we organize how students learn. And most importantly, how we assess that learning. So how many of you were asked this question dozens of times when you were growing up? Right. And I can imagine probably some of the answers that you had. So you were asked this question in 5th grade. What did some of you say?
Paleontologist.
What's that?
Paleontologist.
Paleontologist. Are you going to be a paleontologist?
No.
Okay.
Fighter pilot.
Fighter pilot. You're not a fighter pilot, I would assume, right? I mean, we are constantly asked this question right now and I wanted to be a fireman, a baseball player. I'm obviously neither today. Now, how many of you get asked this question now on college campuses when you're on college, right? What is your major, right? If you're on college campuses, it's almost the first question even me as a reporter will ask you. Okay, well, I know you're here, so what's your major? And if I didn't know you went here, I'd probably ask you first, where do you go to college? And then secondly, I would ask you, what's your major? We really have, it's really kind of a custom of higher education, this idea of thinking of people in terms of where they go to school and what they major in. And my argument is that the economy is really changing at warp speed. And many of the jobs that are in high demand today and in 5 years didn't even exist 4 or 8 years ago. And on top of that, Americans switch on average their job about every 4 years. And of course, many people also have multiple careers over their lifetime. And so really against this backdrop, colleges and universities are trying to figure out how to best prepare students for this evolving world. And the trend in higher education since the 1960s has been to create more vocational majors. So there's really been a flight away from what we think of as the classic liberal arts and into this idea of specific, very practical majors. And in fact, every 10 years, the government collects a list of all the majors offered by American universities. 2 of the 5 majors on that list didn't exist in 1990. So you can just see there's been a 20% increase just since 2000 of the number of majors on that list. And half of them, by the way, have been in 2 fields, healthcare and what I would broadly describe as homeland security. So we are moving more and more, colleges and universities are moving more and more into these very narrowly tailored majors. Partially out of a marketing reason, because they think, well, if I say we're going to offer a degree in cybersecurity and none of our competitors do, people are going to think, wow, I could get a job in cybersecurity by getting a degree in cybersecurity from X university. And secondly, they tell me that employers are demanding these more narrowly based practical degrees. At the same time, increasingly, students are hedging their bets. So how many of you know people who double major? Or double major in yourself? Okay, so a lot of you. And that's very true. So there has been a huge increase in double majors at colleges and universities over the last 10 years. This is just data. There's been a recent study done of double majors at a selection of 12 universities. Vanderbilt, 40% of students now at Vanderbilt double major. MIT has jumped, the number of double majors there has jumped 2-fold just since 1993. 25% of students have double majors at Georgetown. Economics is the most popular component of double majors. Foreign languages are the most popular one for women. And in fact, foreign languages in particular benefit from double majors. So there's basically less than 2% of majors are foreign languages, but when you add double majors, it increases to 10%. So foreign languages in particular have really benefited from this idea of the double majors. Many students couple together a science major and a non-science major, and more of them in these studies say that one is practical and one is not. So many students who are science majors, I don't know if any of you who are double majors here major in science and a non-science, but sciences sometimes students are kind of forced into that, and in non-science, that's kind of the fun one. There really is no one way to double major. About a quarter of students pick majors that complement each other or where the requirements overlap. But students are more and more hedging their bets in this more competitive of job market. And my argument is, my question is, do majors matter? And there's really a lot of disagreement over this as I've talked to employers, as I've talked to people who hire students, and as I've talked to faculty members and career services people in the last year and a half. Now, some will argue, like Peter Capelli, who's a Wharton School business professor, that they do, and they do for one solid reason. He just wrote this book called Why Good People Don't Get Jobs. And he argues that many employers now, especially big employers, have automated the hiring process so much that if you don't have the right keywords on your resume, including the right major, you're never going to get through that first cut of the resumes. And as a result, more people are picking either double majors because it puts the right keywords on their resumes, or they're majoring in these very practical majors, thinking that that will help them in the long run. I argue, though, that, again, based on the work that I've done over the last year and a half, that except in a few specific disciplines, engineering, for example, some of the hard sciences, that majors don't matter as much as we think they do. And I will argue that, again, from really drilling down from what employers want, that the cognitive abilities that students have and the experiences that they gain in college matter more. And for the most part, we have majors because it's an easy way to organize the institution. We have to figure out how to organize faculty, we have to figure out how to organize schools, we have to figure out how to organize disciplines. And it's also an easy thing when every school has majors for the most part, it's an easy thing to explain to the prospective students and parents. It's hard to explain if you don't have majors. But to me, in talking to, again, a lot of the employers that I've interviewed over the last year and a half, and reading some of the work of people like Roger Schenck, who is a cognitive scientist, is that it's abilities like this that matter more. Abilities like prediction, modeling, planning, negotiation, and teamwork. It's abilities that you get from cross-disciplinary courses and from combining different majors that matter more. And as I talk to students over the last year and a half, I've asked them, how have you acquired the abilities and the skills that you have right now? And many of them didn't talk about their majors. After we got beyond that first question, what is your major? They started to talk more about the experiences that they gained in college. So when I asked them why they majored in something specific, they said, because it has the most that major has the most interesting professors and the most interesting courses. And I started to ask them and group these into themes about what they thought they were getting out of college. And then when I went to the employers and started talking to HR directors and CEOs and other people who hire on a regular basis, I started to match those two things up. And I've come to, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've come to the conclusion that there are 4 buckets, as I would call them, that are really important in terms of gaining experiences in college that prepare you well for the workforce. One is global. Having an international experience increasingly important. And whether that's study abroad, working for a global company, or having a cross-cultural experience, even if it's a week-long trip, faculty-led trip overseas, incredibly important. And from talking to the students who have done it and the graduates who have done it, something that they remember and use every day in the workforce. Secondly is this idea of faculty mentors. Again, majors matter less, and in some cases, courses matter less than faculty matter. And this is one reason why I believe that online education is not going to be this big disruptive innovation that's going to wipe campuses like this away. Because the idea that this face-to-face interaction that you really could only get in person and you could get in small amounts is incredibly important. It's the faculty that many of the graduates that I talk to talk about more than their majors and talk more about their classes. It's the mentors that they had in college that have helped them launch their careers. Research, undergraduate research in particular. Obviously, it's slightly different if you're a graduate student, but the opportunities to have undergraduate research experiences, not just in your senior year, but even as early as your freshman year, incredibly important to employers. A lot of the employers I talked to, and as they looked at the skill set of their best employees, talked about those cognitive abilities that I had on the previous slide, but they mapped them against what the students did in college, and many of them had really deep undergraduate research experiences, where again, they had faculty mentors, worked one-on-one, had capstone courses, not only, again, only in their senior year, but also in their freshman, sophomore, and junior years. Add all of those together, and I said, okay, is that it? And they said, no. There's one other thing that colleges and universities need to teach more of, and that students need to come out with. And that is this idea of being creative, being a risk taker, and most importantly, and it's way at the bottom, learning how to fail. And employers that I talk to and the people who hire, if you have those 3 top things married together with the bottom, you are really a star candidate in their book. This idea that they want people who think outside the box, who are creative, who take risks especially, and most importantly, you learn how to fail. And one of their biggest complaints about colleges and universities is that they don't provide enough opportunities to fail in kind of a safe environment. This is essentially a safe environment. You're somewhat protected here. And the idea that you have to get an A in everything is really kind of disappointing to employers that I talk with, because in the workforce, you are going to fail. And in some cases, the best inventions and the best products that have come out in the American economy have been the result of previous failures. And that if students are not prepared for that, they don't necessarily do well on that front. So one of the ideas of this idea of a flexible college experience in the future that I think it will allow us to blend the experiences between high school, college, and the workforce. So think about it. You graduate from high school in June from a very structured environment. You go to one building, you're there from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or whatever. You go to your classes, you're usually not let off campus. And then suddenly, 3 months later, after high school graduation, you go to a college campus. Multiple buildings, you would live on your own, and suddenly you're mostly living on your own as well, and suddenly you're supposed to know how to be prepared for that. And many of the students that I met during my travels over the last year and a half were not quite ready for that. In some cases, they were badly matched to the institutions that they ended up at, but at the same time, they didn't quite know why they were there, and they would have really benefited from an experience that gave them kind of an alternative pathway to college at 18. So sometimes I wonder whether we should send everybody to college at 18. Maybe 19 is better, maybe 20 is better, and give them those alternative experiences that blend the time between high school and college. And then at the other end is blending the experience between college and the transition to work. Again, in talking to a lot of recent graduates, one of the things that really resonated with me is this idea that they were struggling to launch. And again, in talking to some CEOs, it's the first thing that they've noticed from their young employees. Some companies, some of the major Fortune 500 companies still have training programs, but most don't, right? And they want their employees to kind of be ready to start from day one. And many of the people that I talked to talked about how a college graduate 2 years out is great. Who has previous experience and is kind of ready to jump into the workforce on day one. But there is this kind of struggle to launch for students right out of high school. And so as I've traveled the last couple of months in particularly, I've come across a lot of providers that could assist colleges in easing this transition between high school and college and the workforce. And I just want to talk briefly about some of them, then move on to some of these results of these surveys, and then open it up to Q&A. And one of them is the Millennial Trains Project, which this summer is going to send 3 trains cross-country, from the West Coast to the East Coast, 10 days. Amtrak has donated the trains. They're going to take 100 millennial students. They could be high school students, they could be high school graduates, or they could even be college students or college graduates. They're going to put a bunch of mentors on those trains. They're going to have 10 whistle stops along the way. And really the purpose of this is twofold. One is to show the interior of the country to the rest of us who are really used to only seeing the East Coast and the West Coast. But when they stop in these towns, they're going to connect these students to nonprofits, to businesses in those towns. And the idea really is to get the best ideas from all over the country and learn how young adults in their 20s can scale those ideas in their hometowns, on their college campuses, and elsewhere. And at the end of the day, at each of these whistle stops, the groups are going to come together from the local community, government leaders, political leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, with the students on the train. And they're going to talk about what they've learned during their day-long stop in these towns. And at the end, they're going to produce videos and other materials that really inspire people to create these ideas in their hometown. I think, by the way, that they're still taking applications for this project. I wish I were in my 20s, because I would love to do this. By the way, started, by a 25-year-old Georgetown grad who started this project. Institute. I just spoke to these folks a couple of weeks ago. This is the idea that that very few American companies now offer apprenticeships. And so what they have done is they've gone to companies, they said, hey, we'll help you set up apprenticeships, and then we'll put a college curriculum around it. And so the idea there is that high school students can apply, they can take this apprenticeship, they can also take college classes for credit, get paid for this, and then eventually go to college. Again, the ideas of these two things to ease this transition between high school and college. And then at the other end, many of you I know probably have heard of Teach for America. Venture for America is built on the same idea. They place recent college graduates in startup companies in what they call second-class cities. Detroit, Las Vegas, Baltimore. These are places where there is a growing startup culture of companies, but they don't have enough talent to hire. And they don't have enough money to hire very talented students, and they're just not finding the talent in those cities. And so Venture for America, very much like Teach for America, places students in these startup companies and helps helps these students grow those companies from startups into sustainable companies. So I wanted to end today on talking a little bit about these key findings. And I don't have a slide on this because I don't really want to share this too widely, from these surveys that the Chronicle just finished. So we surveyed hundreds of employers across the country about the question of, are you happy with today's college graduates? And we did this in association with NPR's Marketplace. And so you'll see the results of this in the Chronicle and on NPR at the end of the month. And I think that the surveys offer both hope and opportunities for colleges and some risks as we go towards the future. So nearly 7 out of 10 employers, so about 70% of employers surveyed, indicated that colleges are doing at least a good job when it comes to producing successful employees. So a positive mark for colleges on that front. Opinions varied by industry, though. Government nonprofit sector were the most positive in terms of what they said colleges were doing. 80% of government and nonprofits said colleges are doing a good job. But services and retail, healthcare, and media and communications gave colleges low marks. About 30% of those industries said that universities are doing a fair or poor job, more than any other industry, when it comes to preparing graduates. Industries like government and education see an overall drop in the value of a 4-year degree, which is interesting. I think it's mainly because they are increasingly hiring people with advanced degrees. So they see more value now in an advanced degree than they do in a 4-year degree. But overall, most employers in this study placed more value on 4-year degrees than they would have 5 years ago. So this idea of MOOCs and all these other alternative providers, very interesting right now, but for the most part, employers still want that stamp of approval, that 4-year degree. Another key finding, 31% of employers indicated that recent graduates are unprepared or very unprepared for their job search. Almost a third of employers said that graduates are not prepared. And according to employers in the study, graduates can better prepare by researching the organization. So many students are just unprepared for interviews and don't know much about the organization, followed by improving interview skills and researching the industry. What was interesting about this is that the media and communications fields ranked the importance of a better resume above all those other things. So they said students who were applying for jobs in media and communications were actually better prepared for interviewing and knowing more about the industry than students in other who were going into other industries, but they thought those students needed a better resume. This is going to be a full-fledged survey. It will be coming out in a couple weeks in the Chronicle and on NPR, and I'll be sharing more details in my writing on this. And so I've laid out a lot this morning on a number of fronts, both on the future of higher ed and what I believe are the future of college majors. One of the things that I learned from researching predictions of 20 and 30 years ago is that we tend to overestimate the speed of change. So we all think, oh, this is going to change in the next 2 years. And it ends up taking 10 or 15. But we tend to underestimate the depth and reach of change. And so when you look back on predictions, sometimes they were wildly under-predicting what might happen in the future. And so unclear to me exactly what's going to happen, but I do know it's probably not going to be as fast as we all think it's going to be, but it may be even broader and deeper than I laid out today. So I appreciate your time today, and I think we have a decent amount of time for questions and answers, and so please ask of them. Thank you. Yes.
Does the survey include data for graduates, I guess?
No, we really looked at the value of the undergraduate degree. What we really wanted to try to find out is that as alternative providers have been increasing, the idea is that can you be like that one student I talked about? Now, he had an undergraduate degree, but right, could you be a high school student, take a couple of these MOOCs, get letters of accomplishment, and then take that to an employer and get a job? And what we're finding right now is that might work in Silicon Valley, and it might work for some tech industries where they've always been used to this idea of badging and this idea of getting certification. But for most employers, the four-year degree or a degree still matters.
You spoke about, there were two things that you spoke about. One was the ability to complete a course in a shorter amount of time by moving through at your own pace. Right. The other was about flipping the classroom, and both of those make good sense to me, but some of us, perhaps only myself, are old enough to remember that there was a self-paced instruction movement back in the 1970s, and that came and went, but would have had the same benefits. I'm not old enough to remember the introduction of the textbook, which should have had the ability to flip the classroom, but it didn't. So help me understand what it is about this technology that leads us to think it's going to have those effects that past technologies didn't have.
Well, first of all, I don't think any of those things will displace those. The textbook is still going to be around, probably not necessarily in print form, but still around. All right, so this is just an addition to that. Two things I think are different this time. Again, could be wrong, just predictions. Two things are different. One is, actually, one is split into two, so maybe three. One is that the technology is so much better, right? If you take, I would encourage you all to take a MOOC. I took one last spring, and I was expecting an online course. Like, I took an online course like 7 years ago, and I was expecting, the video lecture. I was expecting a couple of online tests. It was nothing like that. It was really kind of an engaging experience. Short video chunks, constant assessments, a lot of peer interaction. I was really surprised at the move from kind of the old days of online learning, and old days not even be that long ago, to what they've been able to advance to today. And if you think about Coursera, which is one of the MOOC providers, they didn't even exist a year ago. Today, they have 2.5 million students. They have 215 courses and 33 university partners. Didn't even exist a year ago. So, and it's the quality. Now, they just had a big mix-up this week where they had to cancel a course because the quality wasn't very good. But the quality. So the difference to me, one difference is the technology. Secondly, are the students. Now, maybe the generation in this room might be, maybe at that cusp of kind of growing up in a very digital environment. But I will tell you that the students that I visited with in middle school and in high school are very used to, toggling between devices, kind of learning in very different ways. And I think students did even, especially of my generation, but even a couple of years ago. And I see it, I only have, my daughter is only 3 years old, and she can better navigate my iPad and my iPhone than I can. It's very, very intuitive to her, right? She's of a generation, I think, I'll be on my laptop and she'll come up to it and try to swipe it, right? So she's of a generation already at 3 that is starting to learn in new and in different ways. So I think there will be student demand for this. And then finally, and what I think will most drive this, are college costs. And that is the big difference, I think, from generations ago. Yes, college has always cost a lot, but it's so much more now than it was 20 or 30 years ago compared to, just look at that graph that I put up there of the percentage of family income now that is going to pay for college. As that continues to rise, people are going to look for these alternatives. So I think those three things combined will make this different than last time.
Jeff, from a workforce development and labor standpoint, what are some of the resources that you like that are credible and that do a decent job of informing the public or us, what's out there in the future, that type of thing, fairly current?
In terms of what to prepare students for?
Yeah, job.
Okay.
What the job market's going to look like. And I know labor projections, when you look at DOL, the occupational handbook,
They're off.
They're off.
They're off.
No, but just to stay kind of current, I know Georgetown CEW is real good.
Yeah, Tony Carnevale does really good work on this, but Tony will tell you it's becoming even more difficult now to predict labor market demand in a couple of years. And this is why, to me, it's kind of a fool's errand for students to try to guess what the jobs of the future are going to be. And again, when I quote these statistics earlier, I was just shocked at this huge rise in number of new majors at colleges. So a 20% rise in the number of new majors at colleges between 2000 and 2010. 20% rise in the number of major titles, right? So, and a lot of that was around, as I said, half of those new titles were around what I would call Homeland Security, right? So it was definitely a reaction to September 11th. Hey, let's create, some of it were critical languages, but, cybersecurity, all these security types of degrees. Because the thinking is, we'll create this degree, and there'll be all this demand for these jobs in 4 or 5 years, or even now, and our students will get jobs. Well, first of all, by the time it takes a college to develop a new degree program, right, then you have to go recruit students. It takes them 4 years, if perhaps maybe 5 or 6, to get through. The whole labor market could change by then. So I think that this idea of preparing, again, in certain areas, yes, engineering and the hard sciences, right? There are certain things that, there are certain reasons to have those majors. But this idea of really trying to prepare students for these very specific jobs that are in high demand now, or we think are going to be in high demand, I think is really a fool's errand at this point. And I think that these skills matter. This whole idea of, you're training people for their 5th job, not their 1st job, right? You're training people how to learn on the job, right? So you're going to have, I was a journalism major in college, and I was a broadcast journalism major in college, and we used reel-to-reel tapes. Nobody uses that. We learned how to use that now. That's a skill that is, I guess I could go cut tape if I wanted to, but nobody does that anymore. And now it's like, that's something I paid for back 20 years ago that I don't even really use anymore. So this idea that time in college is much better spent at practicing these broader skills that can help students do. Now, the problem is, what's interesting about this is that you talk to CEOs and they love these skills, right? And then you talk to the people who are hiring, and they just want somebody who can do the job. And so that's in some ways why Peter Capelli's argument works for me, that they're looking for these keywords that somebody has a degree in this, because they just want to fill that job and get it done. And what's interesting to me is there's a real big disconnect between the kind of the executive level of corporations and kind of the day-to-day hiring managers about what they really want in employees. And I wish that they would get more aligned, because I think it would be a much easier argument to make that you should focus on skills and getting this broad education rather than focusing on, a narrowly based major. Yeah.
I feel just in talking about the labor market, I feel like you're kind of talking about it in general, but how much should universities look at a regional level and the interplay between the strengths of their region? This is a manufacturing and healthcare center, so should CASE focus on kind of creating these engineering majors, or do you still want to apply these broad skill sets?
I think you want to apply these broad skills. First of all, it's hard to kind of match up with your local economy all the time. Again, just as the national labor pools change, so do regional labor pools. One thing though, I think that institutions have to get better at is that, we have this, and Richard Florida talks a lot about it. He's the author of Rise of the Creative Class. He talks a lot about these mega regions that are being created around the country. And what happens is he calls it a means migration. So every spring when college students graduate, they end up moving to the same 5 or 6 cities. And you can see it kind of now in the in the percentage of students who have bachelor's degrees in many cities. So I live in Washington, D.C. More than 50% of the city has a bachelor's degrees. That's compared to probably some cities here in Iowa or in Ohio that have probably fewer than 20%, right? So this idea of how does a city that doesn't have a high percentage of college graduates, how do you create more of them, and how do you get them to stay there? It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? Do you create the degrees first and the jobs follow, or do you create the jobs first and the students follow? So I think just as at the national level, I think it's a hard thing to try to match up always with the local labor force. I think that if you're creating just very smart, intelligent, entrepreneurial students, they're going to be the ones, as was described earlier, who are going to be starting their own companies right here in school and staying here in the Cleveland area. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, in the back.
I wonder, I'm Jennifer Price Davis, I work with the Career Center, and so I wonder, how do companies measure or look for that student who learned to fail as they kind of, many have, let's say, grade point requirements that would indicate that you should have gotten an A. So it feels like there's a little disconnect.
There is a disconnect there, and I think when I say fail, probably not in class, like not in your grades, right? You should create other experiences where you learn how to lose, right? This idea of not to take anything away from this generation, but this idea that everyone gets a trophy just for participating. I think that's what they're pushing back against. It's not, they obviously want smart people who did very well in class, right? But that's not everything. They want people who don't get frustrated by failure. So this idea that as you're creating new ideas and as you're creating new products, you're going to have to pivot many times because you're going to fail, and that has to be acceptable to you and has to motivate you. You said something that reminds me of what I see on both ends of the scale, and this is this idea of increasingly massive amounts of data being used to help employers make better hiring decisions and students pick better colleges. So I'll start on the front end and then I'll end on the back end. On the front end, you're now seeing in 3 states, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Virginia, and you're about to see this in Colorado, where the state is matching up college graduates. There's a unit record on every single one of you. It's like a social security number, right? And they match that up to the unemployment insurance records of the state. So when you're employed, when you work at a company in the state and they pay unemployment insurance, they have to tell the state how much you make, right? And so what these 3 states have done is matched up those 2 records together. And they are now able to show prospective students what the first year salaries are of graduates of programs and institutions in the state. So you can go on Virginia, for example. Just look on their website, and you could go there and you can say, okay, I want to major in business, and you can look up every single institution in the state of Virginia. You can see what their graduates are making in their first year, and it's a big difference in some cases. Or you could, if you want to go to the University of Virginia and you want to know what are the different salaries between what a English major makes and what a business major makes, you could see that. And so there's a lot of data now coming into the system that goes back to this value question: what are you getting in return? And this is not to say, by the way, that your entire college decision should be based on money, right? Or that your entire major should be based on money. But what I think that information sources like this provide is that if you're going to go $50,000 in debt or $60,000 in debt, you should probably have pretty good information about what that degree at that institution, about what other people are getting for that degree at that institution. And I, more and more, there are other resources out there that are providing pretty good information about what graduates are doing. LinkedIn now, you can get a pretty good sense of who's in your network and where they graduated from and the types of jobs that they're doing. A couple of colleges are getting into this business. I think there's a small liberal arts college in Minnesota, St. Olaf, which has a great return on investment site. It's one of the best ones. I always encourage more colleges to do this. You can go in there, you can say, okay, class of 2011, economics majors, and you can see where they're working. You can see what titles they have, and in some cases you can see how much money they're making. Now, obviously not by name, but what's great about it is it gives you a sense of, what do I do with an economics major at this institution? And when it goes back to that value question, trying to prove value, the more colleges are able to do that, the better off I think they're going to be in terms of differentiating themselves from institutions. And then on the other side, I'll be brief on this, on the other side, companies now are starting to figure out, where did our best employees go to college? Where did they graduate from? And what kind of grades did they get? You're seeing this at the teaching level, and Tennessee does this now, where they are looking at classroom performance and they're looking at their best teachers and where they went to college. And they're starting to see patterns. And as more employers do that, again, I think that comes back to this value question. So I think on both ends, more data, more consumer information for colleges. And colleges that are doing well will succeed, and colleges that are not doing so well will have some problems. Yes, over here.
You talked about some specific skills in that little circle diagram. Yep. And you talked heavily about the emphasis on research and faculty mentors. Yep. And the current university structure, like this institution, is really good at research. And it's easy to plug students in with faculty research.
At an undergraduate level.
Even at an undergrad level.
Yep.
That would seem to me to be at odds with really accessing faculty as mentors, because it's easy for the faculty to go, yeah, I'll take an undergrad, they can do this little, essentially you become their lab rat.
Right, but you're not really getting a really in-depth experience.
That's very different than being mentored. What implications do you see for the university model in trying to reconcile those two divergent issues?
I guess I don't see them as divergent as you do, because they don't necessarily have to be provided by the same person, right? So the faculty mentors might come more kind of on the teaching side, and the research on might be provided by other people. But I'm not quite sure that I see why. Is it just because of the person who's the researcher is just not interested in mentoring students? They just need the work done? Or is there no encouragement for it? Or there's no reward for it?
Well, there's a disconnect on the faculty side in the way faculty are treated, and I'm stepping on toes here, between those who are great researchers and bring in huge dollars to a university versus those who happen to be good teachers and don't spend as much time doing research.
And are not thus rewarded for being good teachers.
And the good teachers tend to be the better mentors.
Yeah. So why can't the good teachers be the good mentors and the good researchers provide the research opportunities? It doesn't necessarily have to be the same person all the time, does it? But both need to be rewarded.
There's the issue.
Both need to be rewarded. And I agree with you. I mean, and I just wrote a column that will be appearing next week that especially on kind of the idea of redesigning courses and focusing really on teaching quality, that professors have to be rewarded for that. That has to be rewarded in the tenure and promotion process and in compensation as well. It can't just be about research. But where the dollars are, as you know. Yes?
Yeah, just so that students in this area know that Cleveland is a Venture for America.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
okay.
It was just announced. We had them in our office today in the Career Center, so...
it's a great program.
They are, this afternoon, looking for companies to link up for students that want to sign up for it. So they're actively pursuing it on campus. You can go to Venture for America website to sign up.
Yeah, I met the first class of students who went through that program. Highly recommended. If you're just looking for, if you're interested in business, maybe you're not quite sure you want to go to business school, but just interested in working in a startup culture, I think it's going to become just as powerful as Teach for America has in a couple of years. Yes, one more. How many, Drew? What are we doing on time?
You have 10 minutes.
Okay.
Having grown up in that black and white lecture hall, I certainly...
It's in color now.
I certainly am very sentimental about people coming together and being together, and I like that you have some faith that the residential model will continue, and you do talk about collaborative learning, but I'm just wondering why one needs to be taught by sort of a second-rate person when you have access to the top people. Like, why would you take your artificial intelligence course at, Podunk State College, when you could potentially be listening to these people from Google.
It's very true, right? So I think that's why what I call commodity courses at many universities are in real trouble. This idea of, especially, artificial intelligence is obviously not a commodity course, but this idea of, one-on-one courses in many universities, right? We've done so many stories of these courses pack hundreds of students into lecture halls, use the same textbook that every other university does. All they do is lecture and provide tests, and that's it. That's the whole experience. Now, we know why universities do that. It provides a subsidy to everything else that they're doing, right? They need the money that comes from those students. But at some point, students are going to, you're giving me a quizzical look at there. Okay, so that provides a subsidy, right? But at some point, students are already getting better resources through these MOOC providers and others. And so I agree that those courses are in trouble. And so what could happen, right? So could we see a university where the residential experience may not be 4 years? It may be, you go through kind of a blended experience from high school to college. Maybe you do apprenticeships, you take some online classes, you do collaborative learning outside of college. And then really the college experience becomes what that institution does best. And at the end, it's really kind of the capstone experience. Maybe it's just junior and senior year. And they focus on kind of what they're best at, and they focus on the experiences that really need to be done face-to-face in small group experiences. I don't think the residential experience is going to go away, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be from September of your freshman year until May of your senior year. And you're going to spend all that time mostly on campuses. That's becoming very expensive. There's always going to be a market for it, but I think that market is going to be at a place like Harvard, which could probably put jail cells on their campuses for dorms and still get, and still be able to reject 9 out of 10 students, right? Where it's going to become very difficult is charging 4 years of residential undergraduate tuition, $50,000+ at Podunk U. That's going to be the trouble. And I think Podunk U is going to have to figure out what is of most value on this campus. Can we potentially shrink it? Can we partner with other institutions? Can we partner with other providers, Venture for America, Institute, other things to kind of create a different type of experience? One of the things that I have noticed about traveling to campuses the last couple of years is that they really look alike. They really feel a lot alike. Everybody talks about differentiation in higher education. We have a very diverse higher education system. Sure, we have 2-year colleges, we have 4-year colleges, we have colleges in big cities like this, we have colleges in the middle of nowhere. That's really the differentiation we have. But you go to we have small liberal arts colleges, big research universities, but a lot of research universities feel a lot alike, and they look a lot alike, right? So why can't some of these universities rethink what they're doing? Because to me, the ones that are going to differentiate what they're doing are the ones that are going to really survive and thrive in the future. I think the others will survive. It's the thriving part that I would worry about.
Yeah, that's where I was making a face, because I think those large lecture courses do help financially support.
They do. It's why research happens at many places, right? But just because we do it that way, because we want many universities are doing it that way because they need the money, right? They don't do it that way because pedagogically it's great, right? They don't do it that way because students are learning more. They do it because that's the way the subsidy works. And I haven't quite figured out, I asked this question of a lot of finance people in higher ed. I haven't quite figured out how, if those courses go away, how they do it. And no one else has. If somebody figures that out, if they can crack that nut and figure that out, I think they're on their way to probably doing away with those courses and still being able to pay for everything else. But that's the problem right now. One more question, I think. Yes, over here.
I just have a question about, you mentioned the growing competency-based educational providers like Western Governors University, and how traditional institutions of higher learning, such as Case Western Reserve and our counterparts, view graduates from those types of competency-based universities, as far as, say, I got my undergraduate degree at Western Governors University, and I want to do my graduate degree at a traditional residency-based university. There's no grades at Western Governors. It's all pass-fail. So how do traditional reward for in your seat, must have this kind of grade point average to be even considered for a graduate program, view these new models and accept?
Well, they're getting higher, right? So, well, first of all, Western Governors only offers degrees in 4 areas. You know, they're not necessarily, you know, they don't offer a degree in English, for example. So the employers like it. You know, Western Governors is also very adult focused, right? Average age is 26, I think. And so these are people that are really going back to get a different degree or to go back and get their first degree. And they're really in it for the job market, right? And the job market understands what they're getting. At a traditional university, of course, they're going to carry the same name, right? So the employer won't really know the difference, right? So University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee is going to be giving away the same degree that they give away to on-campus students who sit in seats for 15 weeks. So the employer is not going to know the difference in that case. And in Southern New Hampshire's case, they say the employers the employers don't ask about, well, where are the classes, right? Where are the students in the, they just want, can the students do the work? Can they do what, you know, that's what they really want to know at the end of the day. And so I'm not quite sure. Western Governors might be a little different because that's kind of an unusual name, and you know, and it sounds like a for-profit.
But I'm talking about if I'm a graduate from Western Governors and I want to go to grad school.
See, I don't think most of those people go to grad school, and so I don't think that in that case it matters, right? But if you're a student at the Northern Arizona, which has just started its competency-based program, I think that you're going to have a Northern Arizona degree. And I don't know if it's gonna matter. And eventually, as more and more people come out with these degrees, now that's going to be a long time from now. You know, the graduate school admissions committees at these institutions are going to have to kind of figure that out. I think this will be the last question. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how the accreditors feel about these MOOCs.
They're trust me, they're trying to figure this out now, right? This is a huge problem, So right now, you can't get credit for these, right? Unless you are able to take. So yesterday, ACE, which is American Council on Education, they do a credit transfer service. So they certify these types of experiences, and then you can take that to a college and get credit for it, right? So they certified 4 Coursera courses yesterday, which will enable you to take a Coursera course for free. You'll have to pay for a certificate, which will probably cost $40 or something like that. And then you can go to take this to ACE. They will translate it into a grade. You have to take a test. And then you can go to your institution. You can come here to Case Western. You go to the registrar's office and say, give me 3 credits for this. Now, I have a feeling right now, most colleges will say no. What's interesting to me about this, I'm not quite sure what 4 courses ACE said yes to yesterday, but so Michigan teaches a Coursera course, right? So say I'm a student at the University of Michigan, I take a Coursera course, I do well in it, I get the certificate, I go to ACE, I get my credit certification, and I go to the registrar's office at the University of Michigan, and I say, okay, I want credit, and they say no. And I say, wait a second, this is a course that was taught by one of your professors, and I took it, and I just got graded and said I passed. Why won't you give me credit for it? It's because you didn't pay them for it. And that's where I think this, and I think this is going to take a long time to figure out, because I think until more and more students say, hey, wait a second, what's wrong here? The reason why colleges and universities have a corner on the credit market, you know, they say it's about quality, and in some cases it truly is, right? There's some pretty poor credits out there. There's pretty fly-by-night providers out there. But the reason why they really want the corner on the credit market is because they get money from it. You know, many students graduate with many more credits than they need because they can't transfer the credits from these other providers into the university. But what's interesting to me is that these are some of the best universities providing these courses online for free. What are they going to say when students show up at their doorstep asking for credit? Hasn't happened yet, but once it happens, I'm going to be kind of curious to see what happens. So, thank you very much for your time today.